Welcome to the AI innovation space. We are your experts, and I'm Iyanu.
And I'm Todd.
We're here to offer our unique insights and hold conversations with top leading innovators in the world of AI and machine learning.
We dissect and discuss the often complex realm of AI in an accessible way and go deep in discussing the innovative technologies that impact our lives every day.
This podcast is sponsored by Lumen, an IT contractor offering a creative and human-centric approach to medical imaging, cybersecurity solutions, training and support, and more. Illumin's values of ingenuity and connection make us a leader in adopting innovative technologies for federal healthcare and beyond.
Visit Illumin's website at www.illumin.com for an overview of the services offered and to read our blog series on leveraging AI for your business. Thank you so much for listening, and let's begin.
So today we have an amazing guest. Her name is Alara Dirik. Some really amazing experiences she's got with organ faces, and we are super excited to have you, Alara, with us. Hi, Alara. How you doing?
Hi, Ianu. Thank you so much. How are you?
Good. So we're just gonna have you do a quick introduction of yourself, and we'll get things started here. So tell us about you, how you got into the AI ML space.
Yeah, of course. So I've been working as a machine learning engineer for the last 5 years. I have a bit of an unusual background. I double majored in marine and mechanical engineering. And then when I was trying to decide on my bachelor's thesis, I decided to do a project on predictive maintenance of wave energy converters. And I had already taken some statistical analysis courses at that point. So I got into machine learning and it was just so mind blowing, so interesting. I wanted to pursue that further. So I ended up doing a master's degree in data analytics and then doing a PhD in computer science. So that's basically my story.
Great. And what was your first introduction into the machine learning space in terms of work experience?
In terms of work experience, I started working as a data scientist for this industrial predictive maintenance company, services company in Turkey. Well, it was very much this IoT company, but they were only working with commercial and industrial customers. And they basically wanted to analyze the energy usage of large buildings and optimize it. So it was a very interesting job because I got to use machine learning and also some more classical approaches, such as heat flow analysis, creating simulations, just creating baseline models, things like that. And that was my first experience. I wouldn't call that a machine learning position. My first professional exposure to machine
I
learning.
see. Did you do a PhD or a master's thesis? What did you work on with those theses?
Yes, for my master's thesis, I was working full time while I was doing the master's. It was an online master's degree. And I was working on this crowd analytics project. And after that was done at the University of Glasgow, I wanted to do something relevant. So I wrote my thesis on dynamic pedestrian counting and tracking. It wasn't extremely novel, it was more like a survey on object tracking, but it was very, very interesting for me because at the time I didn't know that much about what was happening in the computer vision domain. My previous work was mostly IoT time series and natural language processing. So that is basically what got me into computer vision seriously. And I ended up learning a bunch of interesting things like real world usability of these models, even the state of the art models. So that was very valuable to me.
I see. So can you share a little bit more about what thesis was on dynamic pedestrian counting? So what was what was the main goal with that? What were you trying to accomplish? And can you talk more about the machine learning or AI aspect behind that?
Yeah, of course. So let's say you have a video of people, or it can be other objects, it doesn't matter. It can be cars or cyclists, and you would like to first detect all of the individual objects, individual instances of a certain class, such as the pedestrians. And then you would like to track each individual's trajectory. So, and once you can do that, you can use this model for a bunch of different things, such as route optimization, the design of public spaces like train stations, airports, for safety analysis, and also for marketing.
So I had another question for you as well, Alara. I was just curious what you worked on with regards to multi-counting pedestrian that's work. Was there anything that had to do with you being able to use that analysis to help a business target or just businesses in general to be able to drive traffic to their locations?
Unfortunately, the answer is no. And the main thing my research, my master's thesis taught me that even state of the art models in object tracking are not really high performing. So these are all relative, of course. You can propose a new model, work on a new model, have tremendous success over the state of the arts, but it can still be undeployable, unreliable in real life and industrial setting. But for things such as marketing, for example, if you own a supermarket and if you would like to have a rough idea of the number of people coming in and out and the trajectories they frequent, I feel like that's still good enough. So it really depends on the use case.
I see. So, in the instance of like being able to track people as it pertains to supermarket, what would you see operationalizing that type of project? How would you envision that looking like? Should it be a project you intend to pursue maybe in the future?
Yeah, okay, so that's a very good question. And one example I can think of where object tracking algorithms are not good enough to be deployed yet is robotics, because it is one of the major areas object tracking is applied. It is basically used to avoid collisions with a robot or whatever robotic agent you have. Yeah, in that case, that is not very reliable because they train the model on these detected trajectories to generate synthetic data.
That makes sense.
You really want that to be reliable.
Yeah. Also, I was just curious, why did you actually decide to pursue this work? What was your motivation behind pursuing this work?
Well, my motivation was that I genuinely love learning. So I really wanted to get into computer vision. And I really believe that in order to do that, you really have to push yourself. You really have to put the work in. So I wanted something challenging, and this was challenging. And it required me to do lots of reading, lots of research. But to be honest, I also thought that if I gained experience in that specific area, since I worked so long as a consultant, it might be beneficial. And it was.
So, are there other projects in the computer vision space that you've worked on, or do you think you could kind of adapt some of the work that you did in your thesis to that might work well for object tracking, for example?
Yes and no. First of all, I feel like the experience you gain from each project is very valuable. And one of the most important thing you learn as a machine learning engineer is first looking at the business context and then deciding which model is worth giving a try to. Sometimes a simple model with some significant feature engineering is just enough, and there is nothing wrong with that. And you can also transfer the best practices you learn along the way to new projects. But in other computer vision projects, I actually haven't used any component of the things I have done in my thesis. It is open source, by the way, the code. But other computer vision projects I worked on are quite different. For example, I did some work for this Irish company called Roomality, and it is a headsetless virtual reality company. So you basically have this huge screen, and there are cameras tracking you in the room, and the screen changes as if you're just looking at out of the window. So it changes based on your position and where you're looking at. So there was a bit of tracking involved, but not that much. It wasn't very hardcore because it was a single player thing. Another consulting job I did was for this German Berlin based company for 3D object generation. So that was entirely different. Both of these projects were just deployed on hardware, so quite different from what I did earlier.
I see. So going back to this headsetless virtual reality company, what's the main advantage that you think they were after by not using a headset for the tracking? Any thoughts around that?
I think mentioning the use cases would clarify things. Their main targets were the gaming and the entertainment industry. So you can think of it as having this huge screen that changes based on where you're standing and where you're looking at. So it's a dynamic background, dynamic, hyper realistic background. So it looks as if it is real. So if you're a gamer, you can just project the whole game, onto the screen, and the screen basically follows you around the room.
And then you mentioned a 3D object generation a project as well. Can you explain that a little bit more? What kind of objects were they after?
Cars, and I cannot talk about the end customer, but automobile. It was for automobile generation, just the outer form, and that position was also super interesting. And I learned so much about the car design process because apparently car designers actually start with a clay model. Did you know that? They start with a clay model and they decide on what the outer form should look like. But the transition from the clay model to a high fidelity digital model is not that easy. So the product we were working on, that 3D car form generation model, was aiming to bridge that gap, and it works really, really great. It's a very cool product. But from an engineering and research perspective, it was also very satisfying.
Yeah, so the other question that I had for you was then how did you transition into Packley? And can you share? I know you have some limitations there, but can you go into a little bit of what Packley does, what they're about, and all that?
Oh, yes, of course. But that position was actually before the computer vision consulting jobs. So I did my master's thesis. I realized that vision was a very interesting domain. Not that natural language processing is not interesting, but Packley, my time at Packley was before that. And Packley is a Singaporean company whose main product is a legal documentation review software. You basically upload your legal document, and of course, there are different types of legal documents, such as service agreements, NDA, bunch of other documents. But anyway, so you upload your document and it basically predicts what you should and should not include, what clauses might be problematic for each party, and what are missing. And there were also other components for information extraction and anonymization. But I cannot talk about the customers in detail,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
that's really interesting. What were some of the things that you learned from project? And you could be broad about it. You don't have to go into the details.
Well, I think having some engineering experience really help when you're
Mm,
cooling. Also, understanding the business context and the limitations are incredibly important. For example, if it is an online product that will be used in real time, then there's really no point in going for large language models. They are difficult to deploy, and if you don't have the workforce to work on the infrastructure, it's just not worth it. Yeah, so I became more practical, just laying out the expectations and what were reasonably feasible to my customers.
I see. And I believe you use Flask and machine learning infrastructure like AWS and MongoDB. Anything that you learned from that, like in more broad terms, that you think could be useful for someone to know or share if they're trying to use those?
I love Flask, by the way, but after that, I learned Fast API, and I think I like it better. It's not as full fledged as Django, but
yeah, I was gonna say how about Django?
yeah, but still a bit less opinionated than Flask. So I really love it. And yeah, understanding that aspect of web development really made me feel more comfortable as a machine learning engineer. I don't know if it is a weird thing to say, but just having a bunch of seemingly irrelevant tools made me really more comfortable. Having a diverse skill set really helped me feel more confident. But also after getting into research, I could see some things that I couldn't earlier. For example, before that, I took all of the papers at face value, but unfortunately, and I say this with a heavy heart, there is a lot of cherry picking going on in papers published at even top conferences. So that was a bit disappointing, but it also made me more practical in the end.
So anything that you've kind of noticed that you help you detect if there's cherry picking going on? Any like common themes or things that you see, or is it just harder to spot that?
Well, especially with computer vision models, with generative models, it is so easy to cherry pick. You just generate a bunch of things and just pick out the ones that look the best. So I think this is more applicable to computer vision. But in general, in machine learning, the lack of high quality metrics, reliable metrics, is really, really difficult to work with because you don't know what you should compare it to. For classification tasks, it is more apparent, but for generative tasks, or let's say in other tasks such as text summarization, it is not as obvious. So there is still a lot of human component in all of these products. Somebody just checking for mistakes, checking for the results, good quality results, and giving feedback. So I think that's still the reality.
Okay, I see. So we did want to get into some of the work you're doing with Hugging Face and your role with Hugging Face. Can you share what Hugging Face is and what you're working on with them, kind of more broadly?
Yes. So Hugging Face is a large software company, but in terms of its impact, it's not a very large company in terms of the number of the employees. But Hugging Face has a bunch of open source libraries that enables users to load, use, and train state of the art deep learning models with only a few lines of code. So I don't know how often you try new things, but when you go over to a new paper's GitHub repo, it rarely works out of the box. And each time you have to set up a bunch of different things, read the installation and usage instructions. But with Hugging Face's Transformers library, you can just load and use the very different models in the same way. But Hugging Face is more than the Transformers library. We have a bunch of different libraries to help accelerate research and industry usage of deep learning models. We have the datasets library. We host a bunch of different public and contributed datasets online on our hub. We have the evaluate library, which has a bunch of commonly used evaluation metrics. So you can load any model, perform predictions, get predictions, and then just evaluate them on whatever dataset you're using. We have the accelerate library to accelerate training and a bunch of other cool stuff. So it's a large ecosystem, I would say.
That's awesome. So, do you know if, or well, does Hugging Face use existing GitHub repo to update their platform, or do you build the models in house?
We build them in house,
And
yes. But of course, whenever you are building something, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So,
yeah,
bunch of open source projects.
yeah, one just pretty much uses the libraries. So, what are some of the really nice projects, open source projects that you guys have released to the public? Like the ones that you're really, really proud of?
Well, I think all of them are really interesting. No, seriously, we
Are you
just
saying this because you work
no,
for
no.
Hugging Face? Just
Kind
kidding.
of. I didn't realize how sweet some of the functionalities were. So when I was just a PhD candidate, a PhD student, it's impossible to download all of the datasets onto my computer. And every time you have to apply for a grant to rent a server, do your work. But with datasets, you have this streaming functionality, so you don't have to download the whole datasets. You can just download a part of it as you go. And I don't know, maybe it's because I never worked for a large company, or I did my master's and then my PhD without that many resources. That was super valuable to me. So I can see how it's going to affect people, users like me. We also just launched this other open source library called Diffusion. So it is fully focused on diffusion models. And yeah, that is super interesting too.
I see. So could you maybe walk us through like an example of like what an application would be and how you would help to use Hugging Face to solve that problem. Maybe something in object detection,
Yes.
since you're familiar with that, or feel free to pick another space as
Well,
well.
maybe instead of the models I contribute or my colleagues contribute, I can talk about our research division because Hugging Face also does its own research and publishes papers at top conferences. And if you're familiar with the large language model landscape, you probably know that most of the large language models are not released. They release the paper, but they never release the model. And recently released this past summer a multilingual, very large language model called Bloom. And that kind of a move really pushes other companies to release their models and also enables research, like more widespread research in the area. So I think that's incredible. It is just usually so difficult to get your hands on such a model, but here it is like freely available for anyone to use.
Very nice. So, what specifically are the types of projects that you're working on with Hugging Face? Is there anything that you can share in that regard?
Yes, everything I do is open source, so I can share everything. I am focused on the computer vision part. Up until last year, Hugging Face was mostly a NLP company, but since then we expanded into audio, which includes speech, multimodal modeling, and also computer vision. So, of course, the new parts are not as mature as the NLP parts. So, we are trying to expand that part, which involves adding new models, new object detection models, depth estimation, image segmentation, making sure that people have the right resources and working code to train their own models or fine tune existing models on their own data. These are the main things I'm working on nowadays.
Awesome. I also had another question for you. So, how do you guys collect the data that you use at Hugging Face to train your models? Do you have like collaborations with various organizations, or do you generate such data sets synthetically?
Well, I will divide this question into two and answer them separately. So, Hugging Face is both a research and engineering company. So, we have these open source libraries. And for the open source libraries, we use existing models, pre trained models, and put them in a more unified format and just convert the weights to make it available to the general public. So, that doesn't involve research, but just engineering, and the models are already trained, so we are not using any data set for those. And for the research part, for the papers, we use open source data sets. We haven't used any synthetic data yet, but for the Bloom model, it was a collaboration between tens of universities and Hugging Face across the globe because it is a multilingual model and we needed data from as many languages as we could get our hands on.
Yeah, when you say the models are already trained, what do you mean? Like when you say you didn't use any data sets to train the models, can you explain
Yes,
further?
of course. So, for example, when large companies such as Amazon, Facebook, or Google release a model, they sometimes only release the paper, but sometimes they have the code and they also make the trained model, the checkpoints available. So you can download that model and use the code to make a prediction. And
I
if the
see.
model
I see.
checkpoint is available, we take that code and the checkpoint, change the code such that it is in the Hugging Face format. So the model can be loaded and inferred the same way all of the other models are.
I see. That's interesting. So how do you guys, if you don't mind me asking this question, but how do you guys structure your network or your repo to be able to handle both things that were or that are from other
Oh,
companies?
yes, that's a very good question. So we have a few principles. First of all, most of the released code only give you the final output. We would like to encourage further research, so we always make the hidden states of the model available. So you can always output the hidden states or attention. It's a
I see.
transformer model. We also make sure to modularize the code. So we split it into two, and we do this for all models to have this base model and then the segmentation head or the object detection head or whatever task you have. So you have the final output and the hidden states from both the base model and the final task specific model head.
Just one more question, I guess, on Hugging Face. So I know you haven't been there that long, but let's say that you continue to be working there for several years, and Hugging Face does continues to expand. Do you have any idea like what success would look like for you at Hugging Face and what Hugging Face is trying to accomplish? In the next several years or more, I guess.
Yes, so what Hugging Face is trying to accomplish is really genuinely encouraging open source and expanding the open source community and just monetizing on the infrastructure part. And I think doing so is both profitable and also puts pressure on other companies to release their models. Because in the end, all of these models, of course, people want to make money out of them, but they can also be used for really good causes. And we see that every day. So, personally speaking, that's important to me. Otherwise, of course, it's the company and it's a industrial job, but you can still care about it. We designed the models such that people can use the base model to fine tune the model on a completely different data set. So it doesn't matter if the labels are different or even the number of the labels are different. And that really makes it easier.
So related to that, can you just talk a little bit about like you guys are open source? So how is Hugging Face making money to support this endeavor? Are people paying for plans that they're allowing them to use, or can you speak to that a
Oh
bit?
yeah, of course, and that's a good question. We have a couple of products. The first one is the Expert Acceleration Program. So all of the models are freely available, and sometimes companies still need help. For example, fine tuning the model on their own data, deploying them. So we have this basically this consultancy program to form partnerships with companies to help them use our models basically in deployment. We also have the private hub. So if you want to use the hub because it is so convenient, you can do so many things and host it privately on Hugging Face Hub. We have that. We also have inference endpoints. So let's say you have a very large model, and even if it works great, it does whatever you would like it to do, such as object detection. Deploying a large model is not easy at all. So we provide an infrastructure service. We deploy the model in a scalable, distributed manner, and then just provide you with inference endpoints. So you can just send requests to get the predicted output. And these are the main products we have.
So I believe Yanu wanted to go into some discussion on your role as a data science mentor with Springboard.
Yes.
Can you explain what kind of motivated you to do that, what you do with that work?
Okay. That's a lovely topic because I love mentoring and it's a very freelance thing. I don't do it more than 1 or 2 hours per week, but it is very satisfying. Before joining Springboard, I used to volunteer at some boot camps to just talk about data science and machine learning in general. And I was approached by a recruiter, I believe. I wouldn't call that person a recruiter because it is a very low key 1 hour per week job. But they have this machine learning bootcamp, data science, data analytics, and machine learning bootcamps. And they range from 2 months to 6 months in duration. They already have a course, and I mentor people on a weekly basis. And it involves not only talking about machine learning, but coding best practices and also career transitions, how to prepare your CV to apply for a new job, things like that. And people come from very different backgrounds, by the way. Some of them are on the younger side, like 22, 23. Some of them are old as 50. And they are not necessarily looking for new jobs. Sometimes they are just looking to upgrade their toolbox or just learn about the most recent techniques. For example, I once had a mentee who was working as a chemist for the last 25 years or so, and she was just interested in how machine learning was used in that domain. And she wasn't that experienced in coding either. So it was very interesting for me too, because I learned a lot from my mentees and I still keep learning. It's a very fun job. I would 100% recommend it.
I see. That's great. So, what's an example like if someone were to come to you and you're mentoring them? Like, what's an example of that, like a conversation that might look like? What's like a snippet of something you might tell?
It depends on the person. Whenever I meet a new mentee, I spend the first talk just trying to learn about their expectations, what they're trying to get out of this. And it can be so different, you wouldn't believe it. But if they are looking to transition into machine learning, I would tell them to be consistent, just put in some effort every week, like every 2 days, and just believe in themselves. It sounds kind of cheesy, but it really works because I had so many mentees at this point, and some of them didn't do much work, and some of them were extremely consistent. And I'm not talking about making a huge effort like spending an hour every day, but just making a small effort every day or every week. And I really haven't come across anyone who put in the effort and couldn't get what they wanted, which is kind of wild to me because I was honestly expecting some people to fail.
Hmm. Yeah, you must get a lot of people that are very motivated already to be there to begin with, and then
Yeah, I mean, they're motivated, but it also motivated me too.
That is so amazing. I'm a big believer in mentorship, and basically they need to train, the next generation of data scientists. And so hearing that was just so exciting. What platforms do you use to connect with your mentees, and or do you just go into already existing organizations and then literally volunteer to speak, or how does that work?
Well, apart from Springboard, I also mentor some undergrad students at my university.
Oh, I
Yeah,
see. I
and they
see.
are really great. But sometimes it's difficult to do it on a weekly basis. But I'm always up to doing talks or just volunteering for a lecture.
That's awesome. Also, with regards to your mentorship role, can you share a little bit about, or if you do go into more of like teaching, or if it's really pointing people to list of data sets or list of libraries to use, which one is it, more of a teaching thing, or are you just pointing them in the right direction?
It is a 50-50 mix, I would say, especially in the data analytics bootcamp. Some of the people have no coding experience, but that doesn't mean that they can't learn. And I think the biggest challenge over there is they are not necessarily learning things in the correct order. When you're doing a bachelor's in computer engineering or computer science, the curriculum is designed in such a way that you slowly build up the foundation, and then when you're coding you start to understand why you're doing things, how the programming languages are designed and why they are designed in such a way. But if you have no coding experience, you don't have that, and it can be very intimidating. So, based on my mentees' feedback, they tell me that me coming from a similar background and being empathetic really helped them. Because if you have too much experience, sometimes you cannot see how difficult certain things can be without some certain knowledge, certain background knowledge.
That's very
Yeah,
true.
teaching coding
That's very
is
true.
basically my main teaching activity.
Yeah.
thanks for sharing about that very interesting topic on mentoring people. One thing I'm wondering, kind of broader, is are there any challenges that you faced? Can be from Hugging Face or some other projects you've worked on with machine learning products and models that you think might be beneficial to for the community to help improve in the future, I guess.
Yes. So I feel like you really need to pick your application domain very, very carefully because there are certain things you can get away with good results without that much reliability. And I can think of some use cases, artistic use cases in the entertainment industry. But if you're using it in other industries, such as medical use cases, you really need them to be reliable and explainable and also privacy preserving. So it really boils down to the limitations and the business context. But apart from that, you really need to sync the backend engineering team with the machine learning team. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You might end up with a very good model that you cannot deploy, which is less than ideal, of course.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for sharing. One of the question I have is, are there any applications or areas kind of in the machine learning space or computer vision or object detection that you haven't really explored personally yet, but you may like to try to get into in the future?
Well, I definitely would like to explore virtual reality further. And I feel like it is an area that is explored, but not fully because of basic speed issues, inference speed issues. But I feel like it's going to change in the next few years.
Oh, Laura, thanks for taking the time. I guess just to wrap up, is there anything else that you'd want to share about, your work or experience or machine learning or artificial intelligence that you haven't shared yet, that our audience might be interested in?
Yeah, well, I already said this, but I think it's easy to get intimidated, but it's a really fun area to work in. I genuinely enjoy my job. I would recommend it to anyone, and I really believe a bunch of way more interesting things will happen in the coming years. So if anyone is interested, I would highly recommend them to pursue this.
I think the application of VR, like you mentioned earlier, to computer vision is really, really interesting twist or approach to, or I believe, let me put it this way, I believe that VR and machine learning combined would open up some really amazing new opportunities,
Yeah,
like you
exactly. It
mentioned.
is already combined, but I feel like it might be a bit too early still. But
Yeah,
yeah, that
yeah,
shouldn't discourage people from trying.
yeah. Well, like Todd said, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you spending the time discussing with us. It was a really good conversation, and thank you
Thank you
again.
very much. It was great talking to you both.
This has been the AI Innovation Space, sponsored by Illumin. Thanks so much for listening.
Be sure to connect with us through LinkedIn and the Illumin website to learn more about how AI and emerging technology can help you. Also, be on the lookout for our next episode coming soon. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day.